Chapter 9. The Dwarves Purchase Supplies. Lily-White carefully placed one final branch against the others, completing the roof for a lean-to that she had built against a thick fallen log near the dwarves' house. She had seen a poster for her capture in the woods, and was now even more afraid to leave the dwarves than ever, even if she weren't so stupid as to get herself lost on the way. Lily-White went to the entrance for her new home and looked inside. The lean-to was just large enough for Lily-White and for a few possessions that she figured she'd acquire later, such as a new jug of medicine for grandmother. She crawled in and laid down on the green leaves that she had spread on the ground. Through the gaps in the roof, she could see the blue sky.
"That's not bad,"
said Lily-White to herself, putting her hands comfortably behind her head.
"It's rather roomy in here. It just needs some carpet."
The lean-to collapsed violently, branches smacking Lily-White in the face and all over her body. One of the branches pierced the large log as it fell. A hole opened up, and a colony of black beetles rained down on Lily-White. They raced to her face and began to bite her. Lily-White screamed and extricated herself from the debris as fast as she could, slapping her face time after time to kill the biting bugs. "Are you all right, Lily-White?" asked Nicey, who had appeared suddenly and was approaching her holding a silver platter in his hands.
"Do I look all right, Nicey?"
demanded Lily-White, dancing to get the beetles out of her clothes.
"I've got branches in my hair and bugs in my skirt, and I can't get these sticks to stay together. There's snakes in my bed, can't get any sleep for 3 days. If that man wasn't out there trying to kill me, I'd just leave."
"Don't worry," said Nicey. "I'll keep talking to the guys. I'm sure they'll let you back in soon. And either way, I'm sure Tricky wouldn't let anything bad happen to you here. And I've almost got Fetchy convinced to go and get some more of that medicine for your grandma, since we all liked it so much."
"Really?"
asked Lily-White hopefully.
"Sure,"
said Nicey with a dopey grin.
"Anyway, I brought these snacks out here for you to cheer you up."
Nicey held out the platter towards Lily-White. She saw a tray filled with what looked to her like various pieces of rotting garbage.
"Ew, gross! What's this soggy piece?"
Lily-White asked, pointing to a particularly wet lump.
"That's from Nasty. He chewed it up especially for you."
Nicey gave a big, dull smile.
"Why would he chew it? That's disgusting."
"He didn't want you to choke."
Lily-White's face turned green. Inside the house, the dwarves were having another council.
"Tricky, we've got to do something,"
complained Whiny.
"Yeah, we sure do,"
yelled Snuggy.
"Stinky's never smelt worse,"
shouted Gory. "Paunchy has mold in his folds and crabs on his flabs," said Lumpy. "Without his moonlit walks," said Lovey, "Clingy's done nothing but mope and write bad poetry. I think he's gone emo." An example of his poetry. "Roses are red, violets are blue. A flower blooms in the desert. I wish I were dead." Clingy flipped his newly dyed black hair from his eyes so that the others could see him roll his eyes in feigned disinterest. Before Tricky had a chance to answer the dwarves' demands, Bumpy crashed through the front door.
"What are you guys talking about?"
the small dwarf asked.
We hate Lily-White!"
the dwarves shouted in unison.
"Oh, that's funny,"
said an excited Bumpy, rummaging through his pockets.
I was in the forest, and I bumped into a tree, and a picture of Lily White fell on my face.
Bumpy pulled the picture out and faced it toward the group, nodding his head happily.
Wait, gimme that,
said Tricky, yanking the picture out of Bumpy's hands.
Look here,
said Tricky, lowering his reading glasses.
This may be just what we need. It's a wanted poster. Lily White wanted, dead or alive. Reward, 100 gold pieces!
The dwarves looked to each other excitedly.
Now,
said Stumpy, wheeling himself toward Tricky at the center of the circle of dwarves.
How are we going to kill her?
Oh, do we have to kill her? Asked Lovey sadly.
Look, see?
Said Stumpy, grabbing the wanted poster from Tricky.
It says wanted dead.
Or alive,
corrected Nicey, having come inside and still holding his awful food platter.
Well,
said Stumpy,
if you won't make a good slave, then she's good for nothing. I say we just kill her and be done with it.
Yeah, said Tricky, rubbing his hands together,
and we can finally turn a profit.
Tricky looked across the horde of dwarves and called,
All in favor of axing the female in question?
Most of the dwarves, but not all, raised their hands with calls of aye.
It's unanimous,
Tricky decreed without counting.
We'll kill Lily White.
The noise of a bell clattering came from outside. Curiousy went to look out the window.
It's a wagon,
he announced. The dwarves made their way outside and saw an overstuffed covered wagon pulled by a depressed-looking donkey and driven by a sour-faced boy. A jovial and mischievous-looking man with a finely stitched waistcoat and bowler hat was tying up tent flaps to showcase his wares. The side read in big red letters, Fuzzy Bottoms and Son.
Oh, it's Mr. Nigel Fuzzy Bottoms, the forest merchant,
said Nicey excitedly.
And his son, Fleming. How are you, Fleming?
The boy looked surly and didn't even nod in response.
Well, Nigel,
Nicey continued,
what brings you to our neck of the woods?
Why, Fuzzy Bottoms announced in the deep, thick, and dramatic voice of a gentleman gone peddler. I'm just working my way from the gay heavens to Riverwood, and figured you boys might need a few things.
As a matter of fact, said Tricky, we are looking for something. We have a bit of a, shall we say, pest problem. Got anything for that?
Yes, said Fuzzy Bottoms, rummaging through the items on the storefront shelf. I have some traps for small vermin. I'll put you down for everything I've got.
That could work,
said Stumpy, happily imagining Lily White covered in mouse traps.
Nah,
said Tricky with a dismissive wave.
Our vermin's not exactly small. Besides, that sounds like a lot of work. What else do you got?
Bigger you say. How about a potent gas? I've got several canisters in the trunk. For a small service charge, I will even set them up for you.
Nope, we don't really want to smell up our house,
said Stinky.
What's that?
Asked Pointy, pointing to an item on a special display shelf. That? Oh, you guys wouldn't be interested in that, said the merchant, looking coy.
What is it? What is it?
Asked many dwarves in unison. That's just, a poison apple. The dwarves oohed and ahed. Quite right, said Fuzzy Bottoms. Its magical properties will poison anything that takes even one single bite.
What does the poison do?
asked Tricky. Why, said Fuzzy Bottoms, death, of course. Under his breath he added, in most cases. Loud and flamboyant again, he said, but if death is too extreme for you, I might have something that just tickles. He turned around toward his wares.
No, that sounds perfect, said Tricky. Right, guys?
Yeah, that sounds like exactly what we need,
said Stumpy. Well, now that you say it, said the merchant, rubbing his hands on his massive belly, I'm sure it would be perfect. But you'll need a few of them. I just so happen to have 3 in stock, and if you buy all 3 of them, I'll throw in a free bedpan. That's great, said Flimsy. Now Dumpy can stop pooping in our beds. Dumpy eyed the bedpan with loathing. Oh, I don't know, said Nicey warily.
Shut up, you sap,
said Tricky. He turned to Fuzzy Bottoms.
We'll take 'em all.
Tricky handed over a few precious gems in exchange for a sack of 3 poison apples, and with a haw, Fuzzy Bottoms and Sun had ridden away. Before the wagon dust cleared, however, a commotion sprang up. Paunchy, no! cried Bumpy. Put that down! Pointy was hanging on Paunchy's arm, trying to keep his hand away from his mouth. He was too late. Paunchy had already thrown one of the poison apples into his mouth. Tricky looked into the bag of poison apples and saw that there were only 2. Somehow, Paunchy had grabbed one without anyone seeing. Paunchy swallowed the apple whole and grinned in satisfaction. Then he fell to the ground with a loud rumble, knocking several dwarves down and leaving an imprint which can be seen to this very day. Tricky picked up the bag of apples.
All right, boys. Paunchy's dead, and we've only got 2 apples left. We need to make a plan. I know what to do, said Nasty. He quickly yanked one of the apples out of the bag and began to chew it up vigorously. I'm gonna chew up this apple, said Nasty through apple bites, and regurgitate it into Lily White's mouth like a mama bird.
No, Nasty, that's sick, said a dwarf. Spit that out, it's poison, cried another. But before either of them was finished speaking, Nasty had collapsed onto Paunchy's corpse, frothing at the mouth.
All right, said Tricky. Here's what we're gonna do. Point me to Lily White.
Pointy's finger shot up like a bloodhound's nose, and Tricky marched his way off in that direction, followed by a crew of dwarves. Tricky and Pointy led the way behind the dwarves' rotting house. When the dwarf mob converged on Lily White, they found her abusing a badger, smacking it on the top of the head with a broom and yelling,
For the last time, I'm not washing your feet ever again.
Hey!
Tricky yelled. Lily White rounded on the strutting dwarf and yelled,
What?
I've come to bring you a peace offering, said Tricky.
What is it?
Asked Lily White, her eyes narrowed.
It's a delicious red apple,
said Tricky, wiping it on his sleeve to bring out the gloss. Lily White eyed it suspiciously.
What's the trick?
There's no trick,
said Tricky.
It's just a crispy, juicy apple.
Did Nasty touch it?
Asked Lily White.
No, Nasty's gone away,
said Tricky without a hint of sorrow.
He'll never touch anything again.
Oh, that's good,
said Lily White.
I'm glad he learned the value of cleanliness.
Sure,
said Tricky.
So what do you say? Truce?
He held out the apple.
Well,
Said Lily White.
it certainly looks better than that tray that Nicey brought to me.
She took the apple in her hand and looked it over.
All right,
She said after a moment.
truce.
Lily White took a rather unladylike bite. Immediately, her body began to stiffen and her face contorted in rage.
You lying sacks of...
Began Lily White, but before she could finish, she fell to the ground, stiff as a board.
Is she dead?
Asked Stumpy hopefully. Pinchy gave her a good squeeze on the cheek and said,
Maybe. Good enough for me,
said Tricky triumphantly.
Now we can negotiate with the Queen and get exactly what we deserve.